Welcome to Sleep for Stories. Thank you for joining us on this relaxing and mysterious journey. Let us know in the comments where in the world you're watching from and what time it is for you. If you enjoy these stories, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, give this video a thumbs up, and turn on notifications so you don't miss any future tales. Wishing you a peaceful listening experience and a restful sleep. Jason took a few more steps, moving deeper into the dark hallway. The dim light coming from the cracked windows above barely illuminated the room, casting long shadows along the walls. He reached out, his fingers brushing over the strange, unsettling eyes drawn on the walls. The eyes were wide, their pupils black voids, staring back at him with an unnerving intensity. They weren't just random scribbles. These eyes seemed to follow his movements, tracking him wherever he went. "Jason," Sarah's voice echoed behind him, her tone a mix of curiosity and concern. "What are you doing?" He didn't answer immediately. His gaze lingered on the eyes, a creeping sense of dread spreading through him. The eyes seemed to pulse, ever so faintly, as if alive. Jason felt a chill run down his spine. "Hey, you okay?" Ben asked, walking up to him. He noticed the strange expression on Jason's face. Jason turned slowly, his voice barely above a whisper. "These eyes, they're different." "Different how?" Emily asked, joining them. She peered closely at the wall where Jason had been looking, but when she did, she didn't see anything unusual. "It's like they're watching us," Jason replied, his voice shaky. "They weren't just drawn, almost like they're alive." The others exchanged uneasy glances, but before they could discuss it further, a loud bang echoed from deep within the school, followed by the unmistakable sound of something scraping against the walls. The noise made them all freeze. "What the hell was that?" Sarah gasped, her heart pounding in her chest. Ben quickly looked around, his eyes darting to the shadows. "We should get out of here, now." But before they could make a move, the temperature in the room dropped. A cold wind swept through the hallway, extinguishing the few remaining lights. They were plunged into darkness. "Jason?" Emily called out nervously, reaching out to find him. Right here," Jason replied, his voice strained. His hand shook as he fumbled for his phone to use the flashlight. But as soon as the beam cut through the dark, he froze. He froze. Then the walls seemed to move. The eyes on the walls shifted, growing larger, stretching, their pupils now following the group's every movement. The whispers that had been in the back of their minds suddenly grew louder, like a chorus of voices speaking all at once. Look at us." The voice was not from any of them. It was an ancient, deep whisper that seemed to echo from the very walls themselves. The group stumbled back, panic rising in their throats as the walls seemed to close in. "What is happening?" Sarah shouted, backing away from the eyes. The scraping sound returned, louder now, as though something or someone was moving through the walls. "We need to leave," Ben cried, his voice rising in fear. Jason turned to run. But as he did, he caught a glimpse of something moving within the darkness, a figure, tall and thin, with hollow eyes, emerging from the shadows. It wasn't human. It looked like something from a nightmare, its body distorted, elongated, with skin like cracked, decaying paper. Its arms hung down unnaturally, scraping the floor. The creature's eyes locked onto Jason's, and for a moment, time seemed to stop. It didn't speak, but Jason could feel its gaze piercing into him, as if it knew his deepest fears. "Run!" Emily screamed. The group bolted down the hallway, their footsteps pounding against the cold floor as the scraping sound grew louder, faster. The walls seemed to move with them, closing in tighter, and the eyes continued to watch, never blinking, always following. They reached the door to the outside, and Jason yanked it open, but the door didn't lead to freedom. It led to an endless void of darkness, stretching infinitely before them. "Go! Go!" Sarah shouted. But even as she tried to push forward, she couldn't step into the void. It was like the air was thick, holding them back. Then the voice returned, louder than ever. "You should never have come here. The eyes are always watching." The creature's form loomed closer now, its silhouette barely visible in the dim light. The air felt suffocating, and the floor beneath their feet trembled as though something enormous was shifting underneath. Jason looked around, desperately. There was no escape, and then the eyes began to move, crawling down the walls, across the floor, toward them. However, the eyes continued to crawl, their movement unnatural and terrifying. It was as if the walls themselves were alive. Shifting and bending to let the eyes travel down the corridors, across the floor, and towards the group. Each eye seemed to grow larger as it approached, glowing a faint, malevolent yellow that made the air feel thick with dread. Jason's heart with dread raced, his mind scrambling for a way out. His breath came in shallow gasps, but he couldn't look away. The eyes moved with a fluid, creeping motion, like liquid darkness oozing from every corner of the room. Every inch of the space around them was consumed with this crawling, relentless movement. "We have to go now!" Emily screamed, her voice breaking as the weight of the terror finally settled in. She grabbed Jason's arm, trying to pull him toward the door, but the air was thick and oppressive. They couldn't move forward. The ground beneath them started to vibrate with an unnerving, low hum. Jason felt a deep, resonating pulse in his chest, and a horrible realization struck him. Whatever was coming was not just a creature. It was the whole school, alive, its walls and floors moving like a living being, feeding on their fear. The scraping sound returned, now deafening, as if claws were dragging against stone, partially emerging from the shadows. Its eyes were deep, hollow sockets. But where its eyes should have been, there was only a swirling, black void. A wave of nausea hit him, as though just being near it was enough to twist reality. "We need to get out of here," Ben shouted, pulling at the others. "There's no time." The creature's skeletal hand, thin and long, reached out for them, its fingers scraping against the floor with a noise that sent chills through their spines. Jason's legs were shaking, but his body refused to move. He felt rooted to the spot, staring into the abyss that was the creature's gaze. "You should have left," the voice whispered again, filling the air with the same echoing, disembodied words. "The eyes are watching, and they never forget," and bolted toward the back door. The others followed, their footsteps heavy and panicked. As they neared the door, the room seemed to close in on them, the eyes crawling faster, reaching toward them like tendrils, desperate to latch on. As Jason reached the doorframe, he felt a cold, clammy hand grip his ankle, pulling him backward. He screamed, struggling to break free, but it was no use. The cold grip tightened, and he looked down to see a mass of black, writhing eyes on the floor, all locked onto him, their glowing pupils dilated and hungry. "Jason!" Sarah screamed, reaching out to him. But the eyes grew larger, more numerous, and Jason couldn't tear himself away. He could feel them pulling at his very soul, their cold gaze digging into his mind. Each eye seemed to whisper his deepest fears, his regrets, until all he could hear was the deafening echo of their voice. "We are the Watchers. You cannot escape." With a final, desperate burst of strength, Jason wrenched himself free. He scrambled forward, his heart racing in a wall, his chest. The door slammed shut behind him, but the whispers still filled the air. The eyes were everywhere, even outside the building, crawling on the walls, in the trees, and across the sky. He could feel them following him, chasing him, chasing him. Even now, the group stood in the cold night air, gasping for breath, their faces pale with terror. "What was that?" Ben stammered, his voice shaking. "I don't know," Emily replied, her eyes wide with fear. "But I think it's still out there." The air around them grew colder, and the distant whispers of the eyes filled the space, their voices haunting and persistent. "We are always watching." Jason looked around, his body still trembling. They had escaped, but deep down he knew it wasn't over. The eyes were always watching, waiting for their next move. And somehow, they were never really alone. The cold air felt suffocating as they stood in the shadows of the abandoned school. The whispers of the eyes still echoed in Jason's mind, a constant presence, gnawing at the edges of his thoughts. They had escaped the school, but the feeling of being watched never left them. The darkened sky above seemed to press down on them, heavy and oppressive, as if the world itself were closing in. Jason turned to the others, his breath shaky. "We can't just stand here. We need to stand here. We need to stand here. Go." Ben looked at the dark horizon, his face pale. "Where do we go? We're trapped." "We need to get as far away as possible," Emily said, her voice steady despite the fear that still radiated from her. "The creature? Those eyes, they're part of this place. It's not just the school, it's the whole town. The entire area is infected." Jason looked back at the school, his mind still reeling from the horrific sight of the creature's eyes and the unshakable feeling that the walls themselves had been alive. "Then, we need to find a way to stop it." "Say, we can't just leave. We don't have a choice," Ben said, his voice cracking. "It's too late, whatever that thing is. It's already a part of this place. We can't outrun it." As they walked away from the school, the distance between them and the cursed building seemed to grow wider, but Jason felt no relief. The eyes, the whispers, they were still there. Lurking in the dark, he could feel them, following them, no matter how fast they moved. The group stumbled through the overgrown streets, the moonlight casting eerie shadows on the cracked pavement. The houses around them were abandoned, but every so often, Jason caught a glimpse of movement in the corners of his eyes, shadows that weren't there when he looked it. Directly, he felt the eyes on him, always watching, always waiting. "Do you hear that?" Emily asked suddenly, her voice sharp with fear. Jason stopped in his tracks, listening closely. At first, he heard nothing, but then he caught the faintest sound, a soft, scraping noise, distant at first, but growing louder with each passing second. "Not again," Sarah muttered, her voice trembling. The scraping grew louder, closer, as if something was moving toward them from the dark. Jason's heart raced. He glanced around, but there was nothing, only the broken remnants of the once thriving town. And then he saw it, a figure, tall and thin, its form barely visible in the darkness, but its glowing eyes were unmistakable. The same hollow, black eyes he had seen in the school, now locked onto him from our end of phase. "The street? Run!" Jason shouted, grabbing Sarah's arm and pulling her along. The others followed, their breath ragged as they ran down the empty street, the scraping noise growing louder, closer. Behind them, the figure moved with unnatural speed, its form flickering in and out of view. Jason could hear its whispers, faint but growing stronger with each passing second. "You cannot escape. We are always watching." The ground beneath their feet seemed to tremble, as though the town itself was alive and reacting to their presence. The streetlights flickered and died, plunging them into total darkness. Jason felt the weight of the creature's gaze pressing down on him, and the fear in his chest turned to panic. "Where do we go?" Ben gasped. The car's back that way, but it's not safe. Does it matter? Jason shouted back, his voice hoarse. We're not safe anywhere. It's not just the school, it's everywhere. They reached the edge of the town, but the figure was still there, moving faster now, closing the distance between them with terrifying speed. Jason's legs burned as they pushed forward, the darkness swallowing them whole. The streets were well gray, but the darkness swallowing them whole. The streets were twisting, as if the town itself was warping around them, the very air thick with the sense of something ancient and malevolent closing in. Suddenly, the ground shifted beneath Jason's feet. He stumbled, falling to his knees as the earth seemed to open up, a massive crack forming in the pavement from within. An unholy light shone pale and cold, flickering like a distant star. Jason tried to push himself up, but the crack widened, pulling at the very foundation of the town. That creature's eyes locked onto his, its form now fully visible, its skin cracked and decayed, its limbs long and spindly, with claws that scraped the ground. Its mouth was a cavernous void, and as it opened, a guttural growl reverberated through the air. You, the creature whispered, its voice carrying a sense of ancient hunger. You were the one who dared to awaken us. Jason's heart raced, his breath shallow. He couldn't move. He couldn't escape, suffocating, like the weight of the entire world bearing down on him. But then, just as the creature lunged toward him, something strange happened. The ground beneath him erupted in a burst of light, blinding, pure light. The creature recoiled, its form flickering and distorting, as if the light was tearing at its very being. The air crackled with energy, and Jason's body felt weightless as the light consumed everything around him. The creature screamed, its voice becoming round him, distorted and hollow, until it was drowned out by the overwhelming sound of the light. And then, as suddenly as it had appeared, everything went silent. Jason opened his eyes, gasping for air. He was lying on the cold ground, but the creature was gone. The darkness had lifted, and the world around him was still, but there was no sign of the others. Sarah? Ben? Emily? Jason called, his voice trembling, but no answer came. The streets were empty. The town was gone, and all that remained was the faint whisper in the wind. We are always watching. The silence around Jason was suffocating. His breath came in short, shallow gasps as he sat up, the coldness of the ground biting into his skin. The eerie calm that surrounded him felt unnatural, like the world had frozen in place, holding its breath. He stood shakily, his legs trembling beneath, and there was no sign of the others. No Ben, no Emily, no Sarah. The streets were empty, and the once dilapidated buildings of the town were now shrouded in a thick, oppressive fog. It was as if the town itself had disappeared, leaving only like the shadow of what it had once been. Jason's mind raced. Had they really escaped? Or had the creature done something to them? A sickening thought crept into his mind. Had the eyes gotten to them too? Had they been consumed, trapped in some realm of torment like the others before them? Sarah? Jason called again, his voice cracking. Emily! Ben! But the only response was the wind, which whispered through the fog in strange, unintelligible sounds, like distant voices calling out to him. Jason stumbled forward, his eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of movement. The air was thick, the ground beneath his feet wet and sticky, as if the entire town had been abandoned for decades. But the fog was moving in strange patterns, almost alive. It shifted, coiling around him, blocking his vision. And then, from the vision corner of his eye, he saw it. A shadow, a flicker. Something or someone moving in the distance, just beyond the mist. Jason's heart skipped a beat. hope flickering in his chest as he rushed toward the figure. "Hey, over here!" Jason shouted, his voice desperate. The shadow paused, and for a moment, Jason thought it was one of his friends. But then the figure turned toward him, and he froze. It wasn't one of them. The figure was tall, too tall. Its limbs, tall, too tall. Its limbs unnaturally long and thin, like a distorted version of a human. Its face was covered in shadow, but Jason could feel its eyes on him, dark, hollow, and unblinking. "Who are you?" Jason demanded, his voice shaking. "Where are my friends? What happened to them?" The figure didn't answer. It simply stood there, watching him. The air grew colder, and the ground beneath Jason's feet began to crack, just like it had back at the school. A deep, resonating rumble filled the silence. Like the earth itself was waking up. The figure took a slow step forward, and the sound of its footsteps echoed in Jason's ears. Each step was heavy, deliberate, as if it was drawing nearer with intent. Jason's instinct screamed at him to run, but his legs felt frozen in place. He couldn't move. He couldn't look away from the creature's haunting, empty eyes. The air thickened, pressing in on him from all sides, and the whispers returned. They weren't just voices anymore, they were screams, cries of anguish, of people who had once been alive but were now nothing more than shadows trapped in the web of the creature's power. Jason felt their pain, their fear, as if it were his own. "We are always watching," the voice whispered again. But Weiss whispered again. This time it was louder, more insistent. "We are always here. You cannot run." Jason's pulse thundered in his ears. He could feel the creature's presence pressing in on him, suffocating him. And the world around him seemed to spin. Shadows were growing, stretching, twisting, until they formed a suffocating cocoon around him. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't think. Suddenly, the figure lunged at him, its long, spindly fingers reaching for his throat. Jason stumbled, gazing as he was his throat backward, his heart racing as he tried to evade the creature's grasp. But it was too fast, too strong. One of its hands gripped his arm, pulling him into its embrace. "You are ours now," the voice hissed, a cruel, mocking tone in its words. "You are part of the eyes," Jason screamed, his mind spiraling as the darkness swallowed him whole. The creature's grip tightened, and the world around him blurred into a sickening swirl of light and shadow. The last thing he heard before the vast silence consumed him was the unmistakable sound of the eyes, thousands of them, all watching, all waiting. When Jason opened his eyes again, he wasn't sure if it was the same world he had been in before. The fog had thickened, the town now barely visible through the heavy mist. His body felt strange, numb, disconnected from itself, like he was floating in a dream. He could still hear the whispers, but they were softer now, as if they were coming from far away. He tried to move, but his body wouldn't respond. Panic surged through him as he struggled, but it was like his limbs weren't his own. He couldn't feel them, couldn't control them, and then he realized why. The eyes were everywhere. They were no longer just on the walls or in the shadows. They were in the mist, in the ground, in the very air. Every inch of the town was covered with them, watching, waiting. And Jason was one of them now. Jason's heart raced in his chest as the realization hit him like a bolt of lightning. He wasn't alone anymore, but not in the way he had hoped. The eyes, the thousands, millions of eyes, were no longer just something outside of him, something to fear. They were within him now, all around him, a part of Horus, him. He could feel them in his very soul, pressing in on him, their gaze pulling him deeper into a world he didn't understand. The whispers were louder now, echoing inside his mind as they had in the school. But now They weren't just whispers. They were commands. They were desires. They were memories of things he had never lived. Voices from places he'd never been. They were all of them Sarah, Ben. Emily whispers of their fears, their last moments, trapped in the web of the eyes. You are one of us, the voice echoed again. But this time it was his own voice, distorted, as though his very thoughts had become part of the chorus. Jason tried to scream, but no sound escaped his lips. His body wasn't his own anymore. His limbs stiff and unyielding, as if controlled by something outside of him. The air was thick, the mist swirling faster, and the eyes were everywhere, looking at him from the walls, from the ground, from the very fabric of reality itself. He felt them crawling under his skin, inside his bones, watching his every move. Their pressure on his mind was unbearable, each one digging deeper into his consciousness, twisting his thoughts, bending his will. You belong to the fear. Darkness now, the voice whispered again. You are the watcher. You are the one who sees, who waits. You are one of us now, and you will always be. Jason fought with every ounce of strength he had, but it was futilely. His body wasn't his strength. He was a prisoner in his own skin, trapped in a never-ending cycle of sight, of being watched, of being consumed. His consciousness was slowly eroding, becoming one with the eyes that filled the town, that filled the world. The line between who he was and what the eyes wanted him to be blurred until he could no longer tell where he ended. And they began. His mind flashed to the others, Sarah, Ben, Emily. Were they still out there, trapped in the same fate? Or had they been consumed already? Their voices now part of the chorus of whispers. Were they still fighting, or had they given in? A cold chill ran through him as he felt a distant tug in his chest, a faint echo of their presence, their fear still resonating somewhere within him. He couldn't give up, not yet, but the more he struggled, the tighter the grip of the eyes became. Every part of him was trapped in their gaze, every thought, every movement, an extension of their will. They were inside him now, and there was no escaping it. He wanted to scream again, to break free, but the words would come. The eyes, those horrible, unblinking eyes, had claimed him. They were everywhere. They had always been everywhere. And now, he was one of them. Jason's body felt like stone, weighed down by the pressure of the countless eyes watching him, suffocating him. His mind screamed for freedom, for release, but no matter how hard he tried to fight it, the eyes controlled him. They moved within him, twisting his thoughts, distorting his sense of self. He wasn't Jason anymore. He was a vessel, an extension of their will. You are ours, the voice echoed in his head, a chorus of whispers that made him shudder. You were always meant to be. Every inch of the town seemed to close in on him, the air thick and heavy, the mist swirling faster, pushing him deeper into the nightmare. Jason could feel the weight of the eyes pressing down on him, felt them crawling through his veins, tearing away at his humanity. He could see them now, not just on the walls, not just in it, the shadows, but in the very fabric of reality itself. They were everywhere, all the time, watching, waiting, consuming. We are always watching, they whispered, their voices fading in and out like a distant, broken record. And we are all never alone. Jason stumbled forward, or at least he thought he did. His body was no longer his own. He was merely a puppet, a marionette controlled by the unblinking gaze of the eyes. He didn't know where he was anymore. The town had dissolved into a surreal, twisted landscape of shadows and flickering light. The fog had consumed everything, distorting the world around him. The streets, the buildings, the trees, none of it was real. It was all just part of the web of the eyes, a prison made of illusions. He tried to call out, but no sound escaped his lips. The eyes, the whispers, they filled the air. drowning out everything else. His chest tightened, and for the first time, he felt the crushing weight of despair. He was trapped. There was no escape, no way out. But then, a flicker, a glimmer of something that wasn't part of the eyes, a distant memory, a face. Emily, Sarah, Ben. They were still out there, somewhere. They had to be. The pull in his chest grew stronger, a faint echo of his old self, his old life. The connection was fragile, but it was enough. He wasn't completely consumed, not yet. There was still a part of him, buried deep, that refused to give up. A small ember of hope remained, hidden beneath the weight of the eyes. He focused on that ember, clinging to it with all his might. The fog seemed to swirl around him, the eyes growing more frantic, more insistent. But Jason held on. He could feel his hand and lower blood. Treaty and May and Jean and No. Citrace and more tragic, more insistent. But Jason's consciousness slipping, but he wasn't ready to let go. Not yet. You cannot escape, the voice hissed. Louder now, almost triumphant. We are always watching. We are always here. Jason gritted his teeth, forcing himself to move, to think, to fight. He had to find the others. They were still out there. They could still be saved. As he moved, the ground beneath him shifted, warping and bending in impossible ways. The town was falling apart, breaking apart like a shattered mirror. Jason could feel the world crumbling around him, the walls of reality itself disintegrating as the eyes closed in on him, suffocating him. But in the distance, he saw something, a light, faint, but it was there. He pushed forward, ignoring the voices, ignoring the weight of the eyes. He didn't know if he could make it, but he had to try. The light grew brighter as he stumbled toward it, and as he reached it, he found himself in a different place, a different reality. The fog had lifted, the mist was gone, and for the first time, Jason could see clearly. The town was gone, replaced by an endless expanse of dark, rolling hills. The sky was black, but filled with distant stars, each one flickering stars, each one flickering like a tiny burning eye. And standing before him, in the center of the vast emptiness, were the others. Sarah, Ben, Emily. They stood frozen, their bodies as still as statues, their eyes wide, his voice breaking. No, no, no. He rushed toward them. But as he did, the ground beneath his feet cracked, splitting open like the surface of the ice he had once stood on. He reached out to them, but the darkness consumed him, pulling him deeper into the void. And then, everything went silent. Jason's body felt weightless as the darkness swallowed him whole. He couldn't tell where his body ended, and the void began, as if his very existence had dissolved into the shadows. He could no longer feel the pull of the eyes, nor the distant voices that had once tormented him. The emptiness was complete, absolute. But somewhere, deep within the darkness, there was a flicker of something, a presence, reached out, though he wasn't sure where to. And for the first time, the oppressive weight of the eyes was gone. He couldn't see them anymore. He could breathe again. But it wasn't a relief. It was the quiet before the storm. Jason's eyes snapped open, and he gasped, sucking in a sharp breath. He was lying on the ground, the cool, damp earth beneath him. The faint light of dusk bathed the landscape, and for a brief moment, it felt normal, but the calm didn't last. The normal air around him shimmered, and a low growl echoed through the ground, vibrating deep into his bones. The ground trembled slightly, and Jason's heart skipped a beat. He slowly pushed himself to his feet, his legs unsteady, as if they hadn't been used in days. His breath was ragged as he scanned the world around him. The landscape was empty, barren, but something was wrong. Something was off. He took a cautious step forward, and then another. His gaze darted to the horizon. The dark, to the horizon, hills stretched out endlessly, and in the distance he saw them, Figures, far off, but growing closer. He recognized them immediately. Sarah, Ben, Emily. They were walking toward him, their movements mechanical, slow, as though they were walking toward him. Their movements mechanical, slow, as though they were being pulled along by invisible strings. Their eyes were wide open, and though their bodies moved, their faces were blank, expressionless, as if they weren't truly there. Jason's heart pounded in his chest as he took a step forward. Reaching heart pounded in his chest as he took a step forward. Reaching for them. Guys, please, he shouted, but they didn't respond. Their footsteps were perfectly synchronized, as if they were marching to some dark, unspoken command. Jason's pulse quickened as he approached them, but the closer he got, the more the air seemed to thicken, like walking through a dream that was slipping through his fingers. He reached out to Emily first, but when his fingers brushed against her arm, a shock of coldness ran through him. He recoiled in pain. "Emily," he cried out, "can you hear me?" But she didn't respond. Her eyes were unblinking, staring straight ahead, filled with nothing but hollow darkness. The ground beneath him shook again, and Jason stumbled backward, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He turned to look at the fair horizon, and it was then that he saw it, the creature. The shadowy figure, now enormous, was emerging from the hills. Its eyes glowed, bright and terrifying, like twin suns. It was impossibly tall, its form shifting and distorting as if it didn't belong to the same reality as Jason. The ground cracked beneath it with every step it took, the land itself warping around the creature's presence. Jason's heart stopped. He had thought he was free. He had thought he had escaped the eyes, the whispers, the suffocating presence of the creature. But it had followed him. It was here, and this time, it wasn't just watching, it was coming for him. "No!" Jason screamed, his voice breaking. He turned and ran, his feet stumbling over the uneven ground, the earth shaking beneath him. The figures of his friends followed him, their movements still mechanical, unfeeling. The creature loomed closer, its monstrous form stretching across the horizon. Its eyes locked onto Jason, and he could feel the pull of its gaze, like gravity itself. He wanted to look away, to escape, but it was impossible. He felt its presence in his bones, in his very soul. "You cannot escape," the creature whispered, though its mouth did not move. The voice was deep, like the rumble of thunder, reverberating through his entire being. "You belong to me now." Jason's legs gave way beneath him, and he fell to his knees, his mind spinning. He had no escape. The eyes, the whispers, the creature, they were everywhere, loomed over him. He heard a faint whisper in his mind. It wasn't the creature's voice. It wasn't the eyes. It was familiar. "Jason, we are still here. We're not gone. Fight for us." As the voice lingered, a faint echo of Emily, Sarah, and Ben, his friends, his family. Somehow, they were still alive in the darkness, trapped in the web of the creature, but not fully consumed. They were calling to him. They were still calling to him. They were still and consumed. There, Jason clenched his fists, his resolve hardening. He wasn't going to let them fade. Not like this. He wasn't going to give in. Not now. With every ounce of strength left in him, Jason pushed himself up from the ground. His legs pushed himself up from the ground, shaking. His mind was a whirlwind of terror and determination. He couldn't see the creature's eyes anymore. He couldn't focus on the oppressive weight of the darkness. Instead, he focused on the one thing that had kept him human through all of this. His friends' voices. He turned back to them. His friends who were still moving mechanically toward him, their faces empty, their bodies lost in the grip of the creature. He took a deep breath and raised his hands. The air around him seemed to tremble, but this time, it was different. This time, it wasn't just the creature's presence he felt. It was something more, something ancient. The whispers began to shift, the voices of his friends melding into "Wah-wah. We are with our you." Jason's eyes widened as a surge of power filled him. The creature's gaze, the unblinking eyes, seemed to weaken, flickering. The darkness around him began to twist, warping in response to his will. With one final, desperate push, Jason reached out toward the creature. And as he did, the eyes, the millions of eyes, began to vanish, one by one, retreating back into the shadows. For the first time since he had entered the cursed town, Jason felt free. The darkness began to recede, the weight of the eyes slowly lifting from Jason's chest. His heart still pounded in his chest, but now it was a steady rhythm, not the frantic beat of fear. He could feel the power coursing through him, the strange energy that had awakened in him. It was as if he had tapped into something ancient, something that had been buried deep within the town all along. The creature recoiled, its form flickering like a shadow in the wind. Its enormous presence wavered, its glowing white eyes dimming as though they were losing their hold on him. The whispers faded, replaced by a strange silence, a quiet that felt like a breath after a storm. The air was still, the fog dissipating as the town around him slowly began to return to something that resembled normal. Jason stepped forward, unsure of what was happening, but driven by a newfound sense of purpose. The voices of his friends still lingered in his mind, faint but present. They weren't gone. They were still gone. They were still there, trapped within the creature, but not completely lost. He could feel them, calling to him, urging him to act. "Sarah," he called out, his voice shaky but determined. "Ben? Emily? Emily?" He turned, scanning the desolate town, searching for them. The buildings around him were falling apart, their foundations cracked and broken, but there was no sign of the creature. It had retreated into the shadows, but Jason knew it wasn't defeated. It was still out there, waiting. The ground beneath him trembled once more, but this time, it wasn't the creature's movement. It was something else, something different. The fog began to rise from the cracks in the ground, swirling around him, as if the town itself were alive, responding to his presence, and then from the mist, he saw them. Sarah, Ben, Emily. They stood in the distance, their faces pale, their eyes wide open but unseeing, their bodies stiff and why retreat gorge, unseeing, their bodies stiff and unnatural. They were walking slowly toward him, their movements jerky and mechanical. Their eyes were gone, replaced by an empty void, a hollow darkness that swallowed everything in its path. Jason's heart sank as he realized that they hadn't been freed. They were still trapped, lost within the web of the creature's influence. He could feel the pull of the darkness trying to consume them again, trying to pull them back into the void. But this time, Jason wasn't going to let that happen. He stepped forward, his hands raised, his mind focused on the power that still flowed within him. The creature's influence had weakened, but it hadn't vanished completely. He could feel its remnants, its lingering grip on his friends, on the town, but Jason wouldn't allow it to take them. "You are mine," he heard the creature's voice in his mind, deep and resonant. "You cannot escape. You are part of the ice now." Jason clenched his fists, his body radiating with a surge of energy that seemed to resonate with the very earth beneath him. He could feel the darkness pressing in on him, but he didn't flinch. He couldn't afford to. "I won't be part of you," he said, his voice steady. "Not anymore," he said. His voice steady, closed his eyes, focusing on the connection he had to his friends. He could feel their pain, their fear, their confusion. They were lost, but not beyond saving. He had to free them, to break the creature's hold once and for all. Jason for all. Jason extended his arms, the power within him flaring as he channeled every ounce of his strength into a single decisive moment. The ground beneath him cracked open, the mist swirling violently, and a beam of light shot up into the sky, bright, pure, blinding, like the sun itself had erupted from the earth. The creature screamed, its form writhing in the light, but it couldn't hold its shape. The eyes, the unblinking, ever-watching eyes, began to fade, dissolving into nothingness. The whispers grew quieter, then completely silenced, as the town, the curse, the creature's hold, all of it began to unravel. Jason fell to his knees, exhausted, his energy drained, but as the light began to fade, he could feel it was target scarities. It's an iris creon marinier, the higher adult than a trow. It seemed to it, he could feel his friends. They were still there, still present, their spirits untouched by the darkness. The town was no longer a prison. The eyes had faded into memory, a dark chapter in a world that was now free. As Jason looked up, he saw Sarah, Ben, and Emily standing before him, their eyes clearing. They blinked, confused, disoriented. But they were themselves again. The hollow darkness that had once consumed them was gone, replaced by the familiar warmth of their presence. "Jason," Sarah whispered, her voice shaky. "Is it over?" Jason nodded, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "It's over. The creature is gone. The eyes are gone." But even as he spoke, he couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't truly over. The town had been freed, but the power, the darkness, that still lingered somewhere out there, in the depths of the world. Jason knew that there would always be things lurking in the shadows, waiting, watching, but for now, they were safe. And that was enough. Jason's heart still raced in his chest, as he stood there, surrounded by his friends, the town, the creature. The eyes, all of it seemed to be slowly fading into the past. But Jason knew better than to think it was truly over. There was still a lingering sense of unease that clung to his power. The air, like a shadow that couldn't be shaken. The mist that had once consumed the town began to dissipate, but there was still an unnatural stillness in the air. The cold that had gripped the town, the oppressive atmosphere, was slowly receding, but Jason couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The eyes had vanished, but their presence still felt alive within him. Within them all, they had all been touched by it, infected by the very essence of what had haunted this place. Emily, still weak from the ordeal, reached out to Jason, her eyes wide with confusion. What happened?" Her voice was strained, as if she couldn't quite process everything that had just happened. Jason glanced at her, his heart aching for the fear he saw in her eyes. He didn't have all the answers. He couldn't explain everything, but he knew they had won. They had freed themselves. And for now, that was all that mattered. "I don't know," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But we're free now." Ben, who had been silently standing at the edge of the group, his face pale and haunted, finally spoke up. "The creature, is it gone for good? It won't come back, right?" Jason looked at his friends, his gaze shifting from Emily to Ben. They had all been through so much. The creature, the eyes, the whispers, they had all tried to consume them, tried to make them part of something dark and eternal. But Jason had broken free. He had broken the creature's hold on them. They were free, yeah, Jason said, his voice firm. "It's gone. The eyes are gone too." But even as he said it, the unease gnawed at him. He looked around the town. Once foreboding structures, now just broken shells of what they had been. The streets were empty, the buildings were crumbling, and in the distance, he thought he saw something flicker of movement, a shadow just beyond the horizon. But when he blinked, it was gone. Jason shook his head, trying to dismiss the thought. It was over. They had won. The creature was defeated. The town was free, but something inside him told him that this wasn't the end. The darkness, The eyes they had never really left. They had just retreated into the cracks, waiting. "Let's go," Sarah said suddenly, her voice quieter now. "We've been through enough. We need to leave this place." Jason nodded, but as they turned to walk away, something stopped him. The ground beneath their feet trembled again, and the air seemed to crackle with energy, like a storm was brewing. The shadows in the distance began to stretch and twist, as if the town itself was reacting to their departure. "Jason, what's happening?" Emily asked, her voice filled with alarm. Jason looked up, his heart sinking as he saw it. The sky above them, once dark but calm, was now swirling with dark clouds. The wind picked up, howling through the trees, and the ground beneath them cracked wider, as if the town itself was splitting open. "No," Jason whispered. "It's not over." The darkness in the sky grew, swirling faster, consuming the town. The eyes, they were everywhere again, millions of them, all watching, waiting. They blinked in unison, the pupils narrowing into slits, and the air filled with their whispers, louder this time, more urgent. "You cannot escape." Jason's heart hammered in his chest. He turned to his friends, his eyes wide with fear. "We need to leave, now." But it was too late. The earth beneath them shattered with a deafening roar, and the town seemed to rise up against them. The shadows that had once been distant and faint now seemed to pulse with life, as if the very ground was trying to pull them back into the darkness. The creature's form emerged once more from the ground, but this time it was bigger, more powerful. Its glowing eyes burned brighter, and its massive limbs stretched toward the sky. The ground trembled with each step it took, and Jason felt the weight of its presence, like a living nightmare. It wasn't just a creature anymore. It was something more, a force, a curse, a presence that could never truly be vanquished. "Ours," the voice echoed, louder than ever, as the creature's massive form began to descend upon them. Jason's body went cold, but he didn't hesitate. He could feel the power inside him, the energy he had channeled before. It had been made enough to push the creature back, but it wasn't enough to defeat it. Not this time. "Everyone," Jason shouted. "We have to fight! We have to stop it!" The creature's eyes flashed, its voice growing louder, its presence pressing down on them, filling the air with an overwhelming sense of doom. The ground cracked wider, and Jason knew that if they didn't act now, they would be swallowed whole by the darkness. With a desperate cry, Jason raised his hands toward the creature, the energy within him flaring to life. His friends, despite their fear, joined him, their hands reaching out, their wills coming together to fight the creature once more. But as they focused their power, they realized too late that the creature had already anticipated their move. The ground beneath them buckled and cracked open, sending them sprawling into the void below. Jason's scream was drowned out by the rumbling sound of the earth splitting apart. They were falling, swallowed by the darkness, and the eyes were everywhere. The world around Jason plunged into a whirlwind of darkness as the earth opened beneath him. He fell through the void, weightless, as if gravity itself had abandoned him. The air was thick, suffocating, and the whispers of the eyes filled his ears, louder now, more insistent than ever before. "You are part of us now." The voice echoed, resonating deep-rode. Within him, you can never escape. You are always watching. His mind raced, trying to grasp onto anything, any fragment of hope, but the crushing weight of the voices, the darkness consumed him. He could feel the tendrils of fear curling around his thoughts, trying to drag him into despair. "Jason," a faint voice cut through the suffocating silence, a familiar sound, one that made his heart skip a beat. It was Emily's voice. "Emily?" he whispered, his voice weak, barely audible. He tried to reach out to her, but the void was too vast, and his body remained trapped in the endless fall. Where are you? We're here. But not. Emily's voice was faint, distant. We're all here, Jason. We're trapped. But so are you. We are bound together. Jason's chest tightened. No. No. I won't let this happen. I can't be part of this. I want, but as he reached out, the darkness seemed to respond, growing stronger, swallowing him further. The feeling of being watched intensified, the eyes closing in from every direction. It was as though he could feel the eyes not just on him, but within him, seeping into his mind, taking root in the very essence of his being. Suddenly, everything stopped. The falling ceased. And Jason was suspended in absolute stillness. He opened his eyes, unsure of where he was. He was standing now, but there was no ground beneath him, no sky above. It was as if he were in a space that existed outside of time, a place between worlds. Then, the creature appeared before him. But this time, it wasn't just a shadow, it was whole, massive, towering, massive, towering above him, its glowing eyes piercing through the darkness like burning suns, its form twisted, its limbs long and gaunt, stretching impossibly far, as if it didn't belong to the world Jason knew. It loomed over him, its voice a deep rumble, filling his mind with its presence. You can never escape. You are bound to us, to the eyes. You will always watch. You will always serve. Jason staggered back, his mind racing. He couldn't fight this. He couldn't run. It was everywhere. It was everywhere. In every corner of his mind, in every part of his soul, the creature, the eyes, had consumed everything. But in that moment, something sparked deep within him. A flicker of defiance. He remembered the light, the energy that had coursed through him before, the power that had come from the connection with his friends, from their bond. That power had driven the creature back once before. It wasn't gone. It was still there. Jason closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Focusing on that flicker of energy, he reached for it, his hands trembling as he gathered it within him, harnessing the power that had awakened in him before. The creature's eyes glowed brighter, and the voice boomed, "You cannot fight us. We are the eternal watchers. You are ours." Jason ignored it. He pushed back against the creature's presence, focusing on the connection, on the flicker of light that was still there. He could feel his friends, their spirits intertwined with his, their energy still burning within him. "You are not alone," he heard Emily's voice again, this time stronger. "We are with you, always." Jason opened his eyes, and this time, he didn't just see the creature. He saw the eyes, millions of them differently. They were no longer menacing, no longer powerful. They were broken, shattered fragments of something once whole. They were not eternal. They were not invincible. With a surge of power, Jason reached out and grabbed hold of the darkness. He felt the energy of the eyes, the whispers, all of it. And he pulled. The darkness resisted. But it wasn't enough. The power within him flared, and the eyes began to fade, shrinking away into the depths of the void. The creature roared in fury, but Jason held his ground. "You are nothing." The words were his own, but they resonated with power. The creature's form began to unravel, its massive body dissolving into the shadows, its glowing eyes dimming. The whispers faded, one by one, until only silence remained. Jason stood alone in the emptiness, his body trembling, but free. The creature, the eyes, the darkness, they were gone. For a moment, Jason didn't move. He was still processing what had happened, the overwhelming weight of the battle, the horror of what he had just faced. But then, as the silence lingered, He felt the presence of his friends again, their energy still with him. He wasn't alone. They were there. They were there. Somewhere. Free now, too. Jason closed his eyes, and the world around him began to shift. The ground beneath him solidified, the air cleared, and he could feel the warmth of the sunlight returning. The mist had lifted. The darkness had lifted. The darkness had receded, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Jason could breathe again. And then, in the distance, he saw them. Emily, Ben, and Sarah. They were walking toward him, their faces filled with relief and exhaustion. They had made it. They were free? The curse was broken. They had defeated the eyes. Jason stood there, his chest rising and falling with each heavy breath, as the ground beneath him solidified. His heart was still pounding in his chest, not from fear anymore, but from the overwhelming realization that they had won. They had broken the cycle, the eyes. The creature, they were no more. The darkness had lifted, but as the mist cleared and the world around them returned to a semblance of normalcy, Jason couldn't shake the feeling that something still lingered. It was as if the air itself had a weight to it, like the world was holding its breath. He turned to face his friends, watching as they walked toward him, their figures clearer now, no longer lost in the fog of the creature's influence. Emily, Ben, and Sarah, they were free. The curse was broken, but there was something more, a sense of unease in the air, a whisper of something left behind. Jason, Sarah called softly, her voice still trembling with the aftermath of their ordeal. Is it really over? Jason hesitated. His mind raced. The creature was gone, but was it truly defeated? His mind raced. The creature was gone, but was it truly defeated? They had escaped, but the eyes, had they been extinguished for good, or had they merely been driven into hiding? Jason took a deep breath, squaring his shoulders as he faced his friends. I think it's over for now. Emily reached out, her hand resting gently on his arm. For now? You mean there's more? Jason didn't answer immediately. He didn't want to speak it aloud, but deep down, he couldn't ignore the nagging feeling in the back of his mind. The eyes had been ancient, eternal, part of something older than the world itself. Could they ever truly be destroyed, or had they just retreated into the shadows, waiting for another moment to return? I don't know, he finally said, his voice soft, but we can't stay here. We have to leave this place behind. Ben nodded, his eyes filled with a mix of relief and apprehension. It's done, but we can't forget what happened here. We can't let her get what happened here. We can't let ourselves fall back into the same trap. The group began to move, their footsteps light against the ground that now felt solid beneath them. They walked toward the edge of the town, the once dead buildings now seemingly alive in the fading light of the day. The mist was clearing, and the world around them was slowly returning to life. But even as they walked away, Jason couldn't help but glance back. The town, though still and quiet, seemed to pulse with a strange energy. A quiet hum, like the beat of a heart, lingered in the air. He could feel it. They all cawed, and in the distance, far behind them, something shifted. Jason froze, his heart skipping a beat. There, at the edge of the town, ruins, was a figure, tall, thin, and vaguely familiar. Its shape was distorted by the fading light, but Jason could make out its hollow eyes, staring straight at him, unblinking. The creature, but this time, it was different. It wasn't as large, nor as terrifying. It was more subtle. Its presence wasn't as overwhelming, but it was still there, watching, waiting. The others noticed too. They stopped, their eyes flicking back toward the figure. Confusion and fear, still lingering in their expressions. What is it? Emily whispered, her voice filled with a quiet dread. I thought we were done, Ben muttered, his hand instinctively reaching for his pocket. as if looking for a weapon, but there was no need. They had nothing left to fight with. The figure stood still, silent, as though it was waiting for something. And then, without a word, it began to fade, its form blurring at the edges, dissolving into the twilight. Jason's heart pounded in his chest, but the fear that once gripped him had faded, replaced by a strange sense of resignation. The creature was still out there, but it wasn't the same. It was different, quieter, perhaps even weaker than before. But Jason knew it wasn't gone. It had simply retreated, biding its gum. "Done. Let's go," Jason said, his voice calm but firm. "We've survived this. We'll survive whatever comes next." And as they turned and walked away, the sun finally dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the town. The world was still, silent, and for the first time, Jason felt that maybe, just maybe, they had truly broken free. But deep down, he knew the truth. The eyes were never truly gone. They would always be watching, waiting for the next moment to strike. But for now, they were free. The world around Jason felt strangely quiet. His friends, though free from the creature's influence, couldn't shake the unease that lingered in the air as they walked further away from the cursed town. The weight of what they had experienced pressed down on them. Jason couldn't stop glancing over his shoulder, as though the very shadows themselves were watching him. The figure he had seen in the distance, standing among the ruins, still haunted his mind. Was it the creature? Or had they simply disturbed something older, something far beyond their understanding? They reached the edge of the town, and Jason's pace slowed as he stared out into the wilderness. The darkening sky stretched endlessly before him, and he wondered where they could go. Could they escape what they had awakened? Or were they destined to be forever haunted by the eyes, by the presence of something ancient and unseen? "Jason," Emily said quietly, her voice breaking through his thoughts. "What now? Where do we go from here?" Jason shook his head, his mind still reeling. He didn't have the answers, the creature, the eyes they had been defeated for now, but he knew, deep down, that they were never truly gone. They were a part of something far older than this town. They were a part of something far older than this town, older than anything they could comprehend. "I don't know," he admitted, "but we keep moving. We can't let it consume us." Ben, who had been silent for most of the walk, finally spoke up. "What if it's not over? What if it's just waiting for the right time?" Jason's stomach churned at the thought. What if Ben was right? What if the creature, the eyes, were biding their time, waiting for the right moment to return? But he couldn't allow that fear to control him. "Not anymore. We'll be ready," Jason said firmly, though even he wasn't entirely sure if he believed it. "We've survived this far. We can survive whatever comes next." The road ahead was, well, we can survive whatever comes next, uncertain. But Jason knew that as long as they stuck together, they had a chance they would fight, they would survive, and they would never let the eyes consume them again. But as they walked into the darkness, Jason couldn't shake the tortoise. Feeling that something was watching them from the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike, and deep down, he knew this was only the beginning. The town seemed to stretch endlessly before them as they walked into the fog. The world around them was still, unnervingly so, as if time itself had stopped. The streets that had once been filled with terror were now silent, abandoned. But Jason couldn't shake the feeling that the silence was just a mask. The presence was still there. The presence was still there, lurking, just beyond their reach. "Jason," Emily whispered, her voice barely audible. "Are we safe now?" Jason didn't answer immediately. He didn't want to lie to her. They had broken free from the creature, but the truth was far more unsettling. The eyes unblinking, all-seeing eyes, they were never truly gone. They had simply retreated into the corners of their minds, like a stain that couldn't be washed away. "No," he finally said, his voice low but steady. We're not safe. Not yet. Ben, walking a few paces behind, looked up at the sky, his face clouded with doubt. What do we do now? The town's overrun by this thing? We can't just keep running forever. Jason stopped walking, turning to face his friends. He knew they were right. They couldn't outrun the darkness. The creature, the eyes, had always been a part of them, lurking in the corners of their minds. But there was one thing Jason knew for certain. They couldn't live their lives looking over their shoulders, always waiting for the inevitable return of the eyes. They needed to confront it. One last time, we have to go back, he said, his voice firm with determination. Sarah, who had been silent until now, spoke up. Back? You want us to go back to that hellhole? To the place that nearly destroyed us? Jason nodded. We can't let it win. It wants us to be afraid. It wants us to run. If we keep going, it will never stop hunting us. But if we go back, we can end it. The group was silent, their faces a mix of fear and disbelief. They had barely escaped with their lives, and now Jason was asking them to return to the very place that had nearly consumed them. But Jason knew that if they didn't face it now, the eyes would keep watching, waiting for their chance to strike. Emily, for their chance to strike, stepped forward, her face filled with resolve. I'm with you. Whatever happens, we're in this together. Ben hesitated, but after a moment, he nodded. I guess we don't have much of a choice. And with that, they turned back toward the ears. And with that, they turned back toward the town. As they walked, the fog thickened, the mist curling around their feet like something alive. The familiar sense of dread crept back into Jason's mind. But this time, it was different. He wasn't running from the creature anymore. He wasn't running from the creature anymore, walking toward it. The streets that had once been filled with terror were now eerily quiet. The buildings loomed over them, empty shells of what they had once been. The air was thick with the weight of memories, of things they had fought so hard to escape, but Jason couldn't dwell on that now. He had to focus. They had to finish what they had started. They reached the edge of the town, where the school had once stood where the creature had first revealed itself. It was still there, standing in the distance, its silhouette barely visible through the fog, and as they approached, the ground beneath them trembled, a deep, rumbling sound shaking the earth. You're too late, the voice echoed through the mist, deep and through the mist, deep and malevolent. Jason turned to face the others, his heart pounding. It's here, he said. Get ready. And just like that, the ground split open, the earth cracking wide as the creature emerged from the shadows, its eyes burning with an unnatural light fixed on them. The creature's form was more massive than before, its shape distorted and shifting, as if reality itself couldn't contain its presence. The eyes stared at Jason, and for a moment, everything stopped. The world, everything stopped. The world around him seemed to freeze, the creature's gaze locking onto him, as if it were digging into his very soul. Jason could feel it, the weight of its presence, the pull of its power. You cannot escape, the creature whispered, its voice slithering into Jason's mind. You are ours. We are always watching. But this time, Jason didn't flinch. He had faced this creature before, and he wouldn't back down. Now, he could feel the power inside him, the strength he had tapped into. The strength he had tapped into before, and he reached for it. This time, he wouldn't let the creature control him. He wouldn't let it control any of them. He raised his hands, channeling the energy that had flowed through him before. The air crackled with power as the creature recoiled, its form flickering and distorting in the wake of his energy. No, the creature howled. You cannot defeat us. We are eternal. Jason's hands trembled with the effort, but he refused to stop. He focused on the connection between him and his friends, their shared strength, their determination. Together, they could stop this. Together, They could break the creatures. Hold once and for all. With a final, desperate push, Jason released the energy, and the world seemed to shatter. The creature's scream echoed through the air as its form dissolved into the mist, its eyes fading into nothingness. The ground was fading into nothingness, shook violently as the town itself began to crumble, the curse that had haunted it for so long breaking apart. Jason collapsed to his knees, exhausted, his breath ragged as he watched the town disintegrate before his eyes. The creature was gone. The eyes were gone, but as the dust settled, Jason couldn't help but feel the weight of the darkness still hanging in the air like a distant memory. He knew it wasn't over. Not completely. The eyes, the creature, they were just one part of something much larger, something that would always be watching, always waiting. But for now, they were free. The dust settled around Jason and his friends, the eerie silence of the aftermath stretching out like a heavy fog. The town, what remained of it, was a shell of its former self. The buildings had crumbled. The streets were now just cracked earth and debris. The creature, the eyes, the whispers, they were gone. Or so it seemed, but something still felt wrong, like an unseen weight pressing down on them. Jason stood up slowly, feeling the exhaustion settle deep into his bones. His body ached, his mind weary from the battle, but he knew they hadn't won, not truly. The creature had been defeated, but the feature had been defeated. But the darkness, the eyes, they were still there, lingering on the edges of reality, waiting for the right moment to return. Sarah, her face pale and drawn, turned to him. "It's over, right? We did it." Jason didn't answer immediately. He looked around at the remains of the town, the sense of desolation weighing heavily on him. The creature's form had vanished into the mist, but the land itself seemed to pulse with an eerie, unnatural energy. It wasn't over. It couldn't be. "I don't know," Jason replied quietly. I think we've only scratched the surface." Emily stepped forward, her face tight with anxiety. "What do you mean?" "The creature's gone. The eyes, whatever they were, gone." Jason shook his head. "I felt it. The eyes. They never really left. They were part of something bigger, something ancient. They're not gone, just hidden." Ben, who had been standing a little farther back, raised his hand. "Jason's right. That creature wasn't just some monster. It was connected to this place, to the land. We destroyed it, but I don't think we've destroyed everything it was tied to." Jason looked at his tried everything it was tied. Friends. His heart heavy with the weight of the truth. The eyes were never just watching us. They were a force, a part of something much older than us. If we leave now, it might come back. It might already be here. Emily clenched her fists. "So what do we do? Do we just wait for it to return?" Jason took a deep breath, looking around at the destruction that had once been the town. "No, we go to the source. We find out where it all began, and we end it for good." Sarah stared at him. "Back to the heart of it? After everything we've been through?" Jason nodded. "Yes, if we don't, it'll never end. We have to finish this." Ben stepped forward, his expression one of quiet resolve. "Then we do it. We end it. We're in this together." The group stood there for a moment, the weight of their decision settling in. They had already faced the creature. They had survived the eyes. But now they were choosing to face the heart of the darkness itself, the source. The town, in all its decaying silence, had once been the birthplaces of a terrifying evil. The creature, the eyes, they had been part of a curse that ran deeper than any of them had realized. But now they were going to find out exactly what had unleashed the darkness, and they were going to stop it. They turned as one and began walking toward the heart of the town, the place where it all had started. As they walked, The fog rolled in around them, thick and suffocating. But this time, they didn't stop. They had come this far. They weren't about to turn back. Now, the streets grew darker, the mist thicker. As they approached the old building at the town's center, the school, the place where the creature had first revealed itself, it loomed before them like a haunted monument, its broken windows staring out at them like eyes, its walls groaning under the weight of its years. Jason led the way, his heart pounding in his chest. This was it. They had come full circle. They had to finish this. As they entered the school, the temperature dropped, and the air became dense with something unnatural. The building creaked as if it were alive, groaning under the pressure of the curse that had taken root here. Suddenly, the ground beneath them trembled again, the walls shaking as him, though the very foundations of the school were awakening. Jason's breath quickened as he felt it, the presence of something watching them. The eyes, the whispers, the creature, it was all still there, waiting for them. "Stay close," Jason muttered, his voice low but firm. "We're not alone." They moved deeper into the school, their footsteps echoing through the empty halls. The air grew heavier, and Jason could feel the darkness closing in around them. It was all here, the source of the curse, the source of the eyes. They reached the center of the school, where a massive, crumbling staircase led down into the bowels of the earth. The door to the basement was ajar, and beyond it, the air hummed with an oppressive energy, like 1,000 unseen eyes watching from the shadows. "We have to go down there," Jason said, his voice steady, though his heart pounded with dread. Emily looked at him, her face pale but determined. "Let's end this," with a deepened breath. Jason led the way down the stairs, the darkness closing in around them as they descended into the heart of the town's curse. The eyes were waiting. The creature was waiting. The creature was waiting. But so were they. They were ready. As Jason and his friends descended into the basement, the air grew colder with every step. The stairs creaked beneath their weight, the walls on either side damp and covered in layers of moss, as if the darkness itself had lived here for centuries. The further they went, the heavier the air seemed to get, like a dense fog of pure dread wrapping around them. At the bottom of the staircase, they reached a large steel door. It was old, rusted, and covered in strange symbols Jason had seen before, carved into the walls of the school. The same symbols that had been associated with the eyes, with the curse that had plagued the town for so long. Jason took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. This was it, the heart of the darkness, the source. The others stood behind him, silent, but he could feel their fear, their anticipation. They had all been through so much, but this was their last chance to stop it, to stop the eyes from watching, tormenting them, from coming back to haunt them again and again. He reached for the handle of the door, but before he could turn it, a cold wind swept through the room, blowing out the dim light that flickered above them. The temperature above them dropped instantly, and the whispers returned. "You cannot stop us." The voice was low, echoing from every corner, and Jason's blood ran cold. He could feel the creature's presence in the room with them, though they couldn't see it yet. The air was thick with its power. He gritted his teeth and turned the handle, pushing the door open. It creaked loudly, the sound echoing down the dark hallway beyond. The light from the hallway barely illuminated the room, but Jason could see enough. The room was vast, its walls lined with strange, ancient markings, and in the center of the room, a massive stone altar stood. It was the source, the heart of it all, the place where the curse had been born. As they stepped into the room, the floor beneath their feet rumbled. The altar seemed to hum with energy, and Jason could feel it, a force, ancient and powerful, awakening. The eyes, Those unblinking, all-seeing eyes filled the walls again. Crawling along, seeing eyes filled the walls again. Stone. This time, they were more than just a symbol. They were a living, breathing presence, staring at them from every direction. "We have to destroy it," Jason said, his voice unwavering. "This is where it all began." Ben stepped forward, his hand resting on the altar, his face full of uncertainty. "But how do we destroy it? This thing, it's ancient. We don't even know what it really is." Jason didn't know either, but he felt the power, the darkness. It was all around them, pulsing with an ancient hunger. He knew that if they didn't act now, if they didn't break the connection to this place, the curse would continue forever. "We have to sever the connection," Jason said, looking at his friends. "We destroy the altar, destroy whatever is keeping the eyes alive." Emily nodded, determination in her eyes. "Let's do it together." They all gathered around the altar, their hands placed on the cold stone, and Jason could feel it. The energy that had once been oppressive now started to shift. It was still there, but now it was responding to them, as if the altar recognized that they were no longer afraid. They were ready to fight. Jason took a deep breath, and with all the strength he had left, he focused on the power inside him. He could feel it building, a surge of energy building, a surge of energy that had been dormant since the battle with the creature. The connection to the eyes, to the darkness, was still there, and it was pulling at him, trying to take control again. But Jason wouldn't let it. He focused on the light that had been inside him all along, the strength of his friends, their shared bond, the thing that had kept them together through all of this. It was their hope, their will to survive. With a roar, Jason pushed the energy outwards. The room trembled, the altar shaking as the eyes on the walls blinked in rapid succession, like they were trying to stop him. But it was too late. The light that had been buried deep inside Jason and his friends exploded outward, filling the room with a blinding, radiant energy. The eyes shrieked, the walls cracked, the altar began to crumble, and then, just like that, the presence of the creature, the eyes, the curse, they were gone. The room fell silent. Jason stood there, gasping for breath, his body trembling from the sheer force of what had just happened. The air felt lighter now. The weight of the darkness finally lifted. The stone altar had disintegrated, turning to dust, and the symbols that had once adorned the walls had faded, leaving nothing behind. Jason turned to look at his friends, relief flooding through him. It was over. They had done it. They had freed themselves from the curse that had haunted the town for so long. "We did it," Emily said, her voice soft but full of wonder. "It's over," Jason nodded, but as he looked around, he couldn't shake the feeling that the battle wasn't truly finished. The darkness, the eyes, they were gone, but they were always there, somewhere, watching, waiting. But for now, Jason felt peace. The curse had been broken. The town had been freed, and his friends, they were with him, standing strong, ready to face whatever came next. And with that, they walked out of the darkness, into the light, leaving behind the shadows of the past. As Jason and his friends emerged from the basement, the air around them felt different, lighter, almost as if the very earth had exhaled after centuries of holding its breath. The town, once a twisted of holding its breath, reflection of its dark past, now lay still. The eyes that had haunted them, the creature that had preyed upon their fears, everything was silent. But as they stepped out into the open air, Jason couldn't shake the nagging feeling in the back of his mind. Something was still there. The fog that had once consumed the town was slowly lifting, revealing the crumbling ruins of what had been. The sky, once shrouded in ominous clouds, was now a soft, dusky purple. The first stars beginning to appear. It felt like the world was waking up, stretching after a long, painful slumber. Yet, Jason knew they weren't fully free. "Is it really over?" Ben asked, his voice raw but filled with hope. He looked around, as though waiting for something to jump out from the shadows. Jason looked at him, his chest tight. He wanted to say yes. He wanted to believe that they were safe. But a part of him, the part that had seen the creature in its full form, knew the truth. Darkness like that didn't just vanish. It couldn't. I don't know, Jason admitted, his voice heavy. I don't think it's ever truly over. Sarah shook her head. I don't think it's ever truly over. Frustrated, her eyes scanning the horizon. You're still thinking about it, aren't you? That thing. Those eyes, whatever it was, you've seen it. But we're free now. We've broken the curse. Jason wanted to believe her. He really did. But there was something in his gut, a deep primal instinct that told him it wasn't over. The eyes, the creature, it was all connected to something older, something much larger than they had ever understood. They had only broken a piece of the chain, and Jason feared that one day the link would reconnect and everything would come flooding back. We should leave, Emily said quietly, her voice carrying an edge of worry. This place, it's not just a town. It feels like a graveyard, like we've been walking through a dead place this whole time. Jason nodded, agreeing. But before they could leave, the ground beneath their feet trembled again, and the sky above them darkened. The sense of unease flooded back, stronger than before. Jason turned to face his friends, his eyes wide with panic. Not again! He yet breathed, but it was too late. The fog that had seemed to dissipate was rolling back in, swirling around their feet. The earth began to shake harder now, the ground splitting as cracks appeared in the pavement, like veins of darkness creeping at pavement, like veins of darkness creeping through the town. The wind howled, and Jason could hear the faint whispers again, distant but unmistakable. We are always watching. Jason's breath caught in his throat. He had thought they had destroyed it. He had thought the eyes were gone, but they were back, and this time, stronger than before. No, Jason whispered, stepping back. We didn't finish it. We only stopped it for a while. The ground shook violently, and from the cracks in the earth, dark tendrils of smoke began to rise, curling into shapes that seemed too familiar. Jason's heart raced as the shapes began to solidify, forming figures, tall and thin, with glowing eyes. The figures moved slowly at first, but the whispers grew louder, their voices surrounding them. You cannot run, the voice echoed, now louder and more distinct than before. Jason stood his ground, looking at the creatures that were emerging from the ground. He could feel their presence, like an icy chill, their presence seeping into his bones. He turned to his friends, his eyes wide with fear. They were back, the eyes, the creatures, them, their movements fluid and inhuman, their eyes glowing brighter with each passing second. Jason could feel the energy building around them, and the pressure was unbearable. They had broken the altar, broken the connection to the creature, but they hadn't destroyed it. The eyes were still alive, still watching, and now they were coming for them. Faster now, their bodies flickering in and out of the shadows, each step bringing them closer. Jason could feel his power, the energy he had tapped into before, bubbling up from deep inside. He didn't know if it was enough, but it was all he had. He raised his hands, gathering the energy, focusing on the light that had once defeated the creature. The world around him seemed to bend, and the power within him flared, crackling like lightning. Stay together, Jason said, his voice filled with determination. We can do this. The creatures closed in, but before they could strike, Jason unleashed the energy, the light bursting outward in a blinding flash. The creatures recoiled, their forms flickering as if the light was burning them. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath, the light pushing back the darkness. But as the light began to fade, Jason could feel it. The darkness wasn't gone. It was still there, lurking beneath the surface. The eyes were watching, always watching, waiting for their next moment. He could feel them, and this time, he knew. It wasn't over. The light from Jason's outburst faded, and for a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. The creatures, their forms, the creatures, their forms, flickering and warping in the brilliance of his power, shrieked in pain. But Jason's triumph was short-lived. As the light began to fade, the creatures reformed, their glowing eyes still burning through the darkness. Jason's heart pounded in him. His chest. The creatures were weak, but they weren't defeated, and the whispers, the voices that had once tormented him, were now louder, more insistent. The eyes, they were everywhere again. Jason dropped to his knees, exhausted. The energy where again he had summoned had drained him, and his limbs felt like lead. His friends stood behind him, fear etched on their faces, but they didn't back away. They had come this far together. They wouldn't give up now.
We can't keep fighting like...
This, Ben said, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and determination. This is bigger than us. Jason looked up at the creatures, their forms shimmering in and out of reality. He could feel the weight of their gaze, even as he felt the weight of their gaze. Even as he struggled to remain conscious, it was like being pulled into a void, sucked into the blackness of their eyes. He could feel them within him, scratching at his thoughts, trying to take control. You belong to us, the voice rumbled from the shadows, its tone darker, more insidious. You will always be ours. You will never escape. Jason clenched his fists, forcing himself to stand. His knees wobbled, but he stood tall. He couldn't let them win. Not now, not after everything. We have to stop it, Jason said, his voice low but filled with resolve. We have to end this once and for all. We can't let it control us. Sarah stepped forward, her eyes hard with determination. But how? We've tried everything. The eyes, the creature, it's too powerful. Jason turned to face her. We have to destroy the source. We didn't finish it before, but we can now. We can break the cycle. Emily raised her hand, her expression a mix of fear and understanding. The altar. It was the key before. Maybe we can use it again to destroy the curse completely. Jason nodded, his thoughts racing. The altar had been the place where the darkness had taken root. Maybe it was the place where the darkness had taken root, where it could finally be destroyed. They had already disrupted it. Once maybe, with enough power, they could sever the connection completely. The creatures hissed, their eyes narrowing as they moved toward the group. But this time, Jason didn't back down. He felt the energy inside him beginning to stir again. He wasn't sure if he could summon the strength, but he had to try. We need to get to the altar, Jason said. Together, if we can't stop it here, we'll be consumed. This is our last chance. The others nodded, their fear replaced by a shared resolve. Together, they moved toward the heart of the town, where the altar once stood. The path was treacherous, the ground cracking beneath their feet, as thick darkness fought to reclaim what it had lost. The creatures followed them, their eyes glowing with hunger. The altar stood before them. It had been shattered, the stone cracked and broken, but there was still power here, deep in the earth. Jason could feel it, a pulse of dark energy waiting to be released. This is it, he said, turning to his corcadil. Friends, we have to finish what we started. The creatures were closing in, their twisted forms stretching toward them. But Jason couldn't afford to be afraid. He reached out, his hands trembling, and placed them on the broken altar. The energy beneath him surged, and the ground trembled as if the entire town was coming alive. The creatures screeched, their forms flickering and warping as if they were being pulled apart. Jason could feel the darkness, the malevolent force that had plagued the town for so long. trying to reassert itself, but he wouldn't let it. With all the strength he could muster, Jason focused on the power deep within him, the light that had burned so brightly before. He could feel his friends' presence with him, their energy merging with his, creating a force stronger than any darkness. The creatures screeched in pain, their forms dissolving into the air as the light surrounding Jason flared brighter. The ground cracked open, and the dark energy began to dissipate, pulled into the light, sucked back into the void from which it had come. Jason felt the weight lift from his shoulders. The whispers faded, the creatures were gone, and the oppressive presence that had haunted them for so long was finally vanishing. He could feel the town changing, the curse lifting from it like a veil being pulled away. But just as Jason felt the last of the darkness fade, he heard one final whisper, faint but chilling. "You cannot escape. We are always watching." Jason's heart skipped a beat. The whisper wasn't a voice from the creatures. It wasn't a voice at all. It was something deeper, something ancient. The eyes they had never truly left. They had only retreated, but for now, the curse had been broken. The darkness had been banished, and for now, Jason and his friends were free. Jason turned to his friends. Exhaustion etched into his face. They had won. They had ended it for now. But deep down, he knew it wasn't over. The eyes would always be there, watching, waiting, and one day they would return. As the last of the darkness began to lift from the town, Jason and his friends stood in silence. The air was still, the oppressive weight of the curse slowly fading away. But the quiet seemed too peaceful, almost unnatural. The battle had been won, but for how long? Jason looked around, feeling the vibrations of the earth beneath his feet, still trembling from the battle. The town, once consumed by fear and horror, was now quiet. The fog had completely lifted, and the sky above was clear. The fog had completely lifted, and the faint remnants of the shadows still lingered at the edges of his vision. It felt like the calm after a storm, but Jason knew better. It wasn't the end. He glanced over at his friends. They all appeared shaken, but resolute. Their faces were pale. Their bodies weary, but they were alive. They had survived. "Is it really over?" Emily asked, her voice trembling but hopeful. Jason turned toward her, searching her face. She had been strong through everything, stronger than he had ever imagined, but now, even she seemed uncertain. "I don't know," he said honestly. "Don't think it's over. The eyes, they'll always be there, watching." Ben frowned, looking at the empty streets. "We're free now. This town is a ghost of what it used to be. What can the eyes do now?" Jason couldn't explain it, but deep in his gut, he could feel it. The eyes weren't just a curse on the town, they were part of something older, something vast. They were always watching, always waiting, and no matter how far they ran, couldn't outrun what had been unleashed. "We need to leave," Jason said, his voice low, urging his friends to move. "The town is gone. The source is destroyed, but something still lingers. We need to go. We can't stay here. The others, we need to go. We can't stay here," nodded without question. They knew Jason was right. The town was an echo now, a place that had once been full of life but was now emptied, hollowed out by the creature's influence. Even though the curse had been broken, there was something else, still in the air, something Jason couldn't shake. They began walking, moving away from the crumbling town, their footsteps the only sound in the eerie quiet. But Jason couldn't stop looking over his shoulder. The eyes, they were still there, even though they couldn't be seen. They were etched into the very fabric of his thoughts. They had watched, and now they waited. As they walked farther from the town, the fog continued to recede, and the world around them slowly returned to normal. The sky above them seemed to breathe, the soft hues of sunset painting the horizon. For a moment, Jason let himself believe they were safe. But he knew better. They reached the edge of the town, where the forest began. The trees stood tall and quiet, their shadows stretching long in the evening light. Jason stopped for a moment, staring back at the town that had been both their prison and their battleground. They had survived, but in the silence, he could hear the whispers. Once again, faint but unmistakable. We are always here. Jason clenched his fists, fighting the chill creeping down his spine. The eyes, he could feel them deep in his mind, like a presence that couldn't be escaped. They'll always be escaped. Watching, he muttered, almost to himself. Sarah, walking beside him, stopped and turned to him. What do we do now? Jason met her gaze, his expression grim. We live, we move on, but we never forget what happened here. The eyes, they were part of something bigger. We can't let it consume us, but we can't ignore it either. Emily came up beside them, looking out at the road that stretched before them. Then we keep moving forward. We face whatever comes next. We survived this, and that's all we can do. Ben nodded in agreement. We fight together. For a moment, the group stood still, together, the weight of their shared journey pressing down on them. The road ahead was uncertain, but they had come this far. They were going to stop. Now, no matter what darkness awaited them, they would face it together. Jason took a deep breath, feeling the faint hum of the world around him. He wasn't sure what the future held. The eyes, the curse, the creature, it had all been tied to the town. But Jason felt deep in his bones that the darkness wasn't gone. It was just waiting for the right moment to return. And when it did, they would be ready. With one last glance back at the town, Jason turned to his friends, his resolve hardening. Let's go, he said, his voice steady. Whatever happens next, we face it together. We survived this. We'll survive whatever comes. And with that, they walked into the night, leaving behind the town that had been both their nightmare and their salvation. The eyes were still out there, watching. But for now, Jason and his friends were free. Jason and his friends continued down the darkened path, the forest around them growing deeper and denser. The eerie quiet of the night seemed to press in on them from all sides. As they walked, Jason couldn't help but feel like something was still watching them. The weight of the eyes, the presence of something vast and unknown, hung over them like a shadow. We should find a place to rest for the night, Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. Barely above a whisper. Been walking for hours. Jason nodded. They needed to get some distance between themselves and the town. The journey ahead was long, but he felt the familiar pull of exhaustion starting to take hold. We'll find somewhere safe, he said, though he wasn't entirely sure what safe meant anymore. They continued walking until, after what seemed like an eternity, they came across a small, abandoned cabin. The roof was sagging, the windows shattered, but it looked like it would provide shelter for the night. Jason approached cautiously, his eyes scanning the surroundings. Here, he said, his voice rough from the constant tension. We'll stay here for tonight. They made their way inside, the creaking floorboards groaning beneath their weight. The air inside was damp and cold, but it was better than nothing. They gathered in a corner, huddling together for warmth as the darkness outside pressed closer. Jason sat by the window, his eyes fixed on the forest outside. The night was thick with shadows, and he could feel the presence of something beyond the trees, something ancient, something still watching them. Sarah sat beside him, her face drawn with exhaustion. Do you think it's over, Jason? The eyes, the creature. Are we safe now? Jason didn't answer immediately. The question hung in the air, heavy with the weight of everything they had been through. He wanted to say yes. He wanted to reassure them, to believe that the worst was behind them. But deep down, he knew the truth. No, Jason said softly. I don't think it's ever really over. Sarah's eyes widened slightly, but she didn't argue. She had seen too much. She knew what he meant. The creature, the eyes, they were connected to something far older than any of them had realized. The curse wasn't just a localized thing. It was part of a cycle, a force that had been watching and waiting for eons. Ben sat across from them, staring at the ground. Then what do we do? He asked, his voice tinged with desperation. We can't keep running forever. What if the eyes come back? What if they're still watching? Jason looked up, his eyes meeting Ben's. We fight. We survive. We keep moving forward, no matter what. We can't let it control us. We can't let it make us afraid. Emily, who had been sitting in the corner, finally spoke up. But what if it never ends? What if we can't stop it? Jason turned to face her, his eyes filled with a quiet determination. We have to try. We can't let the darkness win. We've seen what happens when we give in. We've seen what it can do. They all sat in silence, the weight of their journey pressing down on them. But in that silence, there was something else too, a sense of unity. They had been through hell together, and no matter what happened next, they would face it together. The cabin creaked as the wind howled outside, and Jason's mind drifted back to the town they had left behind. The creature, the eyes, they were never truly gone, but for now, they were safe. They had won. They had broken free from the cycle. But the question remained, for how long? As the hours passed, the night grew colder. The tension in the air was thick, and Jason couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It was as if the darkness was watching them, waiting for them to drop their guard. The whispers of fear, eyes faint but persistent, echoed in his mind. He couldn't escape it. Suddenly, the ground beneath the cabin shook, and a deafening crack sounded from outside. Jason's heart skipped a beat, his pulse quickening. It's not over, he whispered to himself. The eyes were still there, waiting. The cabin door burst open with a force that rattled the windows, and before them stood a figure tall, thin, its eyes glowing in the darkness. The creature had returned, but it was glowing in the darkness. The creature had returned, but it was different now. It wasn't just a physical being. It was the embodiment of the curse, the very manifestation of the darkness they had tried to escape. Jason stood, his breath caught in his throat. This time, the creature wasn't just watching. It was coming for them, and it was stronger than ever. The creature's voice was a low, gravelly whisper that seemed to come from everywhere, inside their minds, in the very air they breathed. You cannot escape. You will always be ours. Jason could feel the power of the creature, the weight of its gaze pressing down on him. His friends stood beside him, their eyes wide with terror. But Jason knew they had to fight. They said, his voice shaking but steady. Once and for all. The creature laughed, its voice sending chills down their spines. You cannot. You are already part of us. But Jason refused to back down. He gathered all the strength he had left. The power he had tapped into before, and he channeled it into a single desperate surge. A blinding light filled the room as he reached for the darkness, his will battling against the creature's power. The room trembled, the air thick with the weight of their struggle. The creature's form flickered and distorted, but it wasn't enough. The light that Jason had unleashed flared, overwhelming the darkness, forcing it back. And just as the creature howled in fury, its form dissolved in fury. Its form dissolved into the light, fading away into nothingness. The whispers faded, the pressure lifting from Jason's chest, and the room fell silent. Jason stood there, gasping for breath, his body trembling from the effort. But as he looked around at his friends, he knew it wasn't over. The eyes might be gone for now, but the creature was part of something older, something beyond their understanding. The darkness wasn't gone, it had merely retreated. And so, Jason and his friends, though victorious, knew that they would never be truly free. The eyes would always watch, but for now, they had won. The silence that followed the creature's departure was deafening. Jason and his friends stood there, breathless and battered. Their minds still reeling from the battle. The light that had burst forth in that final moment had shattered the creature's form, but it didn't feel like a victory, not completely. The air was still thick with an unsettling energy, like the darkness, wasn't entirely gone, just hiding, waiting. Jason wiped the sweat from his brow, his legs weak beneath him. He glanced around at his friends, all of them standing frozen, as if they too were waiting for something to happen. Emily's face was pale, her lips trembling, while Ben's eyes darted around nervously, as though expecting the darkness to return at any moment. "We did it," Sarah said softly, but even her words felt hollow. "It's over." Jason opened his mouth to reply, but the words stuck in his throat. Was it really over? He didn't feel any different. The town was still ruined, the earth still trembling beneath their feet. The whispers still clung to the edges of his mind, like a faint echo of something that was never fully gone. "I don't think so, Jason," finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's not over. It's just hiding?" Ben looked over at him, his face creased with worry. "You're not saying it's still here, are you?" Jason shook his head, though the doubt gnawed at him. The creature, the eyes, they were ancient forces, part of something much larger, something that had existed long before this cursed town. Even if the creature was destroyed, the darkness, the eyes, they were part of a cycle, one that couldn't be easily broken. "I'm saying that it's not over yet," Jason said, his voice steady despite the fear rising in his chest. "We may have stopped it for now, but the eyes, those things, they will always be there. They're tied to this place, to the land. The moment we leave, they'll come back." Emily's face darkened. "But we can't stay here. This place is cursed. It's destroyed. We need to leave, Jason. We can't keep running." "But we can't stay here either." Jason took a deep breath, the weight of their situation sinking in. She was right. They couldn't stay here. But where could they go? The curse, the creature, it was tied to this land, but it had also followed them, followed Jason from the very beginning. Wherever they went, would it follow them too? "I'm too. We have to go," Jason said, his voice firm. "But we have to keep moving. We can't stop. Not yet. Not until we know it's really over." The others nodded reluctantly, their exhaustion clear in their faces. They had been through so much woe already, but Jason knew that they couldn't rest, not yet. They had to leave the cursed town behind. But even as they walked away, Jason could feel the eyes on his back, the weight of their gaze following him, even from miles away. They began walking in silence, the weight of their journey pressing down on them with every step. The forest around them was thick with trees, their branches swaying in the wind, but it felt like they were still walking through a dream, a nightmare that refused to let go. Hours passed before they came across a clearing. The moon hung high above, casting an eerie glow over the landscape. The mist that had plagued the town earlier began to roll in again, creeping along the ground like a living thing. curling around their feet, making the air feel heavy. Jason stopped, his heart thudding in his chest. The mist seemed too thick, too oppressive. It was as if the very air had come alive, wrapping around them, suffocating them. The whispers, soft, distant, but unmistakable, began to creep back into his mind. "You are ours." Jason's heart skipped a beat. He looked around, searching the darkness, his breath coming faster. The mist had thickened around them, and though they had only stopped for a moment, he could feel something watching. "We never left," the voice echoed, louder now, and this time it was no longer distant. It was close, too close. Jason turned to his friends, panic rising in his chest. They, rising in his chest, could hear it too. He could see the fear in their eyes, the same realization dawning on them. The eyes, they were here. They had never truly left. "We are always watching." The mist began to shift, twisting around them, as if the land itself, was alive, reacting to their presence. Shadows moved, shifting like living creatures, their shapes flickering in and out of existence. Jason's breath caught in his throat as the whispers grew louder, more insistent. "We need to run. Run," he said, his voice rising in urgency. But before they could make a move, the ground beneath them trembled again, and a figure emerged from the shadows, tall, thin, its form twisting and shifting with every movement. Its eyes, those hollow, burning eyes, glowed with a malevolent intensity, and Jason could feel the pull of its gaze, as though it were tearing at his very soul. It was back, the creature. The eyes, it had returned, stronger than before. Jason stepped back, his heart back, pounding, but he couldn't run. Not now. He knew the creature was tied to this place, but he also knew it was after them, after him. The connection was too strong, and as long as the creature existed, so too would the eyes. "We have to fight," Jason said, his voice shaking with the realization of what was about to come. "We have to finish it now." And so, once again, they prepared for the final battle, knowing that the creature, the eyes, the darkness, they would never truly let go. But Jason refused to give in. He would fight, and he would protect his friends, no matter the cost. It was time to end the cycle. Once and for all, the air grew thick with tension as Jason and his friends stood in the clearing, the mist swirling around them like a living thing. The ground beneath their feet trembled, the shadows shifting and flickering as the creature's presence grew stronger, more tangible. Its glowing eyes pierced the darkness, and Jason felt the familiar pull, the suffocating weight of the creature's gaze settling deep into his chest. It was back. The figure loomed before them, its shape contorting and distorting as it moved, an unnatural, otherworldly presence that sent waves of terror crashing over Jason. He could feel its power, the darkness in its every movement. It was more than just a creature, it was a force, an embodiment of the curse that had haunted the town for so long. "Jason," Emily's voice trembled, but she didn't step back. Neither did Ben. They were all in this together. "What now? How do we stop it?" Jason's breath was heavy, his heart racing in his chest. He could feel the power building, the energy within him stirring, but it wasn't enough. The creature was too strong. The eyes were everywhere. They were the force behind the creature. They were the force behind the creature, the curse that had never truly been destroyed. Jason knew they couldn't fight it the way they had before. There was no simple solution this time. "We end it," Jason said, his voice steady despite the fear that gripped him. He had faced fear that gripped him. He had faced the creature, felt its power, but he wasn't going to back down. Not now. "We break the connection. We sever the curse," the creature hissed, its eyes narrowing, and Jason could feel the temperature around him plummet. The mist grew denser, twisting into dark shapes that seemed to close in on them. The whispers of the eyes grew louder, a constant, maddening hum in his mind. You cannot escape us. Jason closed his eyes for a moment, trying to block out the whispers, trying to focus. The creature wasn't just a thing of flesh and bone. It was a manifestation of the eyes, of the curse that had consumed this place. They had to destroy it at its core, at the very source of the darkness. We have to find the heart of the evil. Bibibus, wills you will dies, and gongoit, I'm in a third of the eye. Curse, Jason said, his voice a whisper, but filled with determination. The altar, the place where it all started. He turned toward his friends, their faces filled with fear, but also with resolve. They couldn't stop now. The town had been a battleground, and the creature the eyes they had been its puppet master. But if they could destroy the heart of it all, they could end the curse once and for all. The ground beneath them rumbled again, and the creature's presence intensified, pulling at the very air around them. The eyes glowed brighter, their glow now a searing white, filling the entire clearing with an unnatural light. Stay close, Jason said, stepping forward. Determined, we go to the altar. We end this. With the creature in pursuit, the group moved quickly, their footsteps echoing in the silence as they hurried through the mist, back toward the center of the town. The shadows twisted around them, the eyes flickering in and out of existence. But Jason kept his focus. The altar was their last hope as they approached the heart of the town. The broken ruins of the altar loomed ahead, its stone fragments scattered across the ground. I was in Italy, and I saw the yellow wolves. You read. Its stone fragments scattered across the ground, but the power of the curse was still there, pulsing from the shattered remains. The mist thickened, swirling around them as the creature's form emerged from the darkness, its glowing eyes fixed on them with a predatory gaze. We can't let it stop us, Jason said, raising his hand toward the altar. He could feel the power of the curse, the pull of the eyes, but he refused to give in. We have to finish it. The others stood beside him, their hands raised in unison, their energy up building as they channeled their will into the shattered altar. The creature screeched in fury, its form flickering as the light from their combined power began to push it back. The eyes on the altar flickered, then began to burn with an intense, blinding light. You cannot stop us, the creature hissed, its voice now a shriek. We are eternal, but Jason wasn't listening to it anymore. He focused all his energy on the altar, on the light that had once driven the darkness back. The creature's form flickered again, and Jason knew they were close. They were weakening it. The eyes, the creature, it all stemmed from this place, from this cursed ground. With one final push, Jason released everything he had. His power surging outward in a blinding flash. The light exploded outward, engulfing the altar, the creature, and the eyes. The creature howled in agony, its form disintegrating, dissolving into nothingness. The eyes, one by one, blinked out, leaving only darkness behind. The ground trembled one final time, and then everything fell silent. Jason collapsed to his knees, his breath coming in shallow gasps. The air was still, the tension finally lifting. The creature was gone. The eyes were gone. The curse was broken. They had won, but Jason knew that this victory came at a cost. The darkness they had faced would always linger, even if it wasn't in the form of the creature, something much older, something that could never truly be erased. The town was free. The creature, the curse, had been destroyed. But the scars would remain, deep in their minds, like a shadow that never fully dissipated. Jason looked at his hesitated friends, each of them breathing heavily but alive. They had done it. They had fought the darkness and won. But the road ahead would always be uncertain. And as they turned away from the altar, walking back into the unknown. Jason couldn't help but wonder what would happen if the eyes returned. But for now, he was content with the silence they had won. For now, as Jason and his friends walked away from the altar, their steps heavy with exhaustion, a sense of finality hung in the air. The creature, the eyes, the curse, they were all gone for now. But as the shadows around them stretched long in the growing dusk, Jason couldn't shake the feeling that the darkness had merely retreated, waiting for a new moment to rise. They walked in silence, each of them lost in their own thoughts, the weight of the battle pressing on their shoulders. The forest around them seemed eerily calm, the trees standing still like silent sentinels, watching their every move. The town they had left behind was now a distant memory, a broken, crumbling place that had once been full of life, but was now nothing but ruins and ghostly echoes. "Do you think it's really over?" Emily's voice cut through the silence, her words tentative. Unsure, Jason hesitated before answering. "No, I think we've only put a temporary stop to it. The eyes, the creature, they're part of something much bigger. They were never just tied to this place. I think we've only scratched the surface." Sarah, walking beside him, gave a soft sigh. "So what do we do now? Do we keep running? Do we just leave and pretend like everything's fine?" Jason's heart sank. He didn't have all the answers. He didn't know what they should do. But deep down, he knew they couldn't let the darkness consume them again. They had to keep moving forward, keep fighting. But how? "We can't run forever," Ben said, his voice steady. "We need to find a way to end this for good." Jason looked at his friends. They were all worn down, their bodies bruised and battered from the journey, but their determination was unshaken. They had survived, and they had fought for their lives. The bond between them was stronger than ever. They had faced the eyes, the creature, and they had emerged victorious. But what now? "We go forward," Jason said finally, his voice firm. "We find a way to destroy the curse once and for all. We can't let it keep coming back." They didn't know what that meant, what path they would take, but they knew one thing. They weren't going to let the darkness win. Not now, not ever. The journey took them through towns and forests, each one darker and more desolate than the last. It was as if the very land had been corrupted by the curse that had once plagued them. Every step felt like they were walking on the edge of something they couldn't fully comprehend. The eyes were never far from their minds, haunting them, following them with every turn, despite their efforts. The whispers never fully disappeared. The darkness, though dormant, was always there waiting, watching. Jason could feel it, feel the weight of it pressing on his soul. He knew that as long as the creature had existed, as long as the eyes had watched, it was only a matter of time before it would return. The days turned to weeks, and their path grew more uncertain. They found places of refuge, hidden away from the darkness, but no matter where they went, they could always feel it just beyond the horizon. The creature, the eyes, they were still part of their world, a part of the cursed land they hadn't won. Not yet. One day, as they passed through a small village, something strange happened. Jason felt a pull, an unnatural compulsion to look around. The village seemed almost untouched by time, a strange stillness hanging in the air. The streets were empty, the buildings abandoned. But there was something about it that felt wrong. "Jason, what's wrong?" Emily asked, noticing his sudden stillness. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Jason's eyes darted around, searching for something, anything that would explain the unease settling in his gut. But there was nothing, only the eerie silence of the empty village. "Something's off," Jason said quietly. "We need to leave." Before anyone could ask him what he meant, the air seemed to shift, the temperature dropping dramatically. And then, just like that, the ground beneath them cracked open, a deep, rumbling noise echoing through the streets. The village seemed to come alive, the windows of the building suddenly flickering with an eerie light. The eyes, they were back. Out of the cracks in the ground, shapes began to emerge, twisted, grotesque figures with eyes glowing in the dark. They moved silently, their bodies flickering and distorting, as if they were part of the very darkness that had consumed the town they had left behind. Jason's heart raced. This was it. The eyes weren't just watching, they were ready to consume everything. "Run!" Jason shouted, but before they could move, the creatures were upon them, surrounding them from every direction. The mist, thick and suffocating, swirled around them as the eyes closed in. Jason could hear their whispers again, louder this time, more insistent. "You cannot escape." The creature's form reappeared in the distance, its glowing eyes burning brightly. Jason stood firm, his body tense, ready to face the darkness again. "You wouldn't back down? Not now! We end this!" Jason shouted, summoning the energy within him once more. His friends gathered around him, their faces filled with fear but determination. They couldn't run. They couldn't escape. The eyes were everywhere, but together they would fight back. They would break the cycle once and for all. The final battle had begun, and this time, Jason knew they wouldn't stop until the curse was destroyed for good. As the creatures closed in on Jason and his friends, the weight of the situation became even more apparent. The eyes, they were everywhere, burning into their souls, watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. Jason could feel the pressure of their gaze on him, the suffocating grip of their power wrapping around him. But something inside him was different now. He had faced this before. He had fought the darkness before. And now, with his friends by his side, he wasn't going to let the creature, the eyes, consume them again. The air grew heavier, and the air grew heavier, and the air grew heavier. Whispers grew louder, swirling around them in a maddening chorus. "You cannot escape." Jason reached out, his hands trembling but firm. He could feel the energy building within him, a spark of light that had once driven the creature away. This spark of light that had once driven the creature away. Time, though, he knew it wouldn't be enough to simply push back the darkness. He needed to sever the connection completely. "We end it here," Jason muttered, his voice barely audible over the whispers. He turned to his friends, his eyes full of resolve. "Together, we have to finish this. For good." Emily, Ben, and Sarah nodded in unison, their faces filled with the same determination. They had already sacrificed so much. They had already walked through hell and back. But this was the final stand. As Jason raised his hands, a surge of energy coursed through him, and he could feel the connection between him and the darkness, between him and the eyes. The creature, the curse, it was all part of something much, much older, something beyond their understanding. But Jason refused to let it control him, or his friends, any longer. With one final, desperate cry, Jason unleashed all the energy he had left. The light bursting from his hands in a blinding flash. The creatures screeched in agony as the light engulfed them, their forms flickering and disintegrating, until nothing remained but the faintest remnants of their presence. The ground trembled beneath them, the mist swirling violently as The final remnants of the darkness began to disintegrate, like a storm being blown away by the wind. The eyes, once so powerful and all-seeing, began to blink out one by one, their presence fading into nothingness. For a long moment, there was once moment. Silence. Jason collapsed to his knees, his body drained, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He had done it. They had done it. The curse had been broken. The eyes were gone, but even as the creature dissolved into the air, Jason felt the air's weight of something else, a realization. The darkness might have been defeated for now, but the land they had walked on, the world they had known, it would never be the same. The whispers had stopped. The creatures were gone, but there was a lingering sense of unease in the air. Something had been changed, twisted by the curse, and the scars would remain long after they left. He looked up at his friends. They were all standing, but like him, they seemed exhausted, drained, and yet free. It's over, Emily said softly, her voice filled with relief. We did it, Jason nodded, though part of him still felt uneasy. They had fought the creature, the curse, the eyes, but there was something about it that still haunted him, something that had followed them, no matter how far they had run. For now, though, he knew it was over. The darkness was gone, and the creature was no more. They had won. With a deep breath, Jason stood, his body aching, but his heart lighter than it had been in a long time. Let's go, he said, his voice steadying now. We can finally leave this place behind. They turned and began walking away, each step taking them further from the town, from the darkness, from the eyes. But even as they left, Jason knew that the scars of what had happened would never fade. The eyes might be gone for now, but they had watched, and in the shadows, in the corners of their minds, they would always be waiting, and maybe, just maybe, Jason would never fully be free.